We don't often need to make data wider, but it does happen sometimes, and so it's useful to know about the pivot wider function. This takes a long data frame with lots of rows and reshapes it into a wider data frame with lots of columns. Essentially, this is the opposite of the pivot longer function. The syntax of the pivot wider function is similar to pivot longer, but even simpler. We are going to take a column of names and a column of values and unstack those into a bunch of separate columns. First, we need to specify the dataset to be reshaped. We can either do this directly, as in the top example, or we can pipe some dataset in from a variable or from another function, as you can see in the bottom example. When we break a single line of code over many lines, as we've done here, it's often helpful to indent the subsequent lines. This is a good visual cue that makes it easier to read the code and instantly see that this is all really just one line of code. RStudio will often indent these line breaks for you, but it doesn't always get it right, so you may need to insert or remove an indent of 2 spaces as required. The only other information we need to provide are the columns that contain the names of the columns to be unstacked and the column of values to unstack. The names from and values from parameters take these arguments. Note that these arguments will be existing columns in the data frame, so we do not put the column names inside quotation marks. Let's look at an example of how this works. Why is this dataset not tidy? Pause the video for a moment and see if you can figure out why. This is an untidy or messy dataset because the cases and population variables are mixed up in the same columns. We want to convert the long, untidy dataset into a tidy format. We will do this by unstacking the columns that contain the cases and population variables. Note that we have a column called type, which contains the names of the columns we want to create. We also have a column called count, which contains the values that we want to unstack. This is the code that we would use to do this. We tell the pivot wider function that the new column names are coming from the type column, and the new column values are coming from the count column. One thing to note again here is that the original data frame stored in the table 2 will not be modified by running this function. Instead, the pivot wider function will create a completely new reshaped data frame. We have not stored that reshaped output data frame here, merely printed it out onto the slide for your viewing pleasure. If you need to save the reshaped data frame for later use, remember to assign this output to a new variable.